Alright, evening all. Okay, I thought the Gibraltar Chess Festival holds a special place in my heart because I once played there. I didn't do very well, but I really enjoyed the event and I got to meet even Boris Spassky there. I played Nakamura at Blitz. It was a really good, fun experience. And, if you haven't played in the Gibraltar Congress, it's not just the top grandmasters that go and play there. It's, amateurs, anyone from even non-FIDE rated, you get a FIDE rating there. And I especially recommend, if you are going to play, to try and stay at the actual venue, the Kalita Hotel. Fantastic experience. And let's have a look. It has some interesting games every year, very interesting games. So Vassily Ivanchuk is playing this year. And the games I'm about to show you have some interest points for me. So this one's quite interesting. Vassily Ivanchuk in round 4. He's currently I think he's leading the event after today's game. I believe he's leading the event. I think it's ending soon, the event, a couple of days, 6th. So anyway, in round 4 he played Fier, Alexandr Fier, Fier, who's a 2572, so Ivanchuk's 2739. D4, and we see now knight f6, c4 e6, the Nimzo engine potentially, but this is avoided with knight f3, d5. Okay, solid opening from black so far, knight c3 c6. Now e3 leaves the bishop at home for the moment. Knight bd7, queen c2. Not moving the bishop straight away. Bishop d6. And actually this is still left at home, this f1 bishop. White just now fianchettos this bishop after castles, bishop b2. And black plays quite energetically in the centre now with the move e5. One thing though about this is that it starts to look like a reverse French defence now after bishop e2. Black actually, maybe a little bit unwisely perhaps, committed to e4. It gives white a type of reverse French defence after knight d2. This kind of French defence pawn structure. Okay, with the fianchetted bishop. But in the French defence, this pawn chain can be quite vulnerable. Especially the d5 pawn could be a vulnerability. We see though black trying to gain space now on the queen side as well. So a6, as though b5 is on the cards. But now Ivanchuk plays g4, so he's going in for this g5 to try and loosen black's control over the d5 pawn. So is this queenside counterplay quick enough now? b5, g5. And I think actually after this b5 there is a kind of weakness of c6 in this position, as well as d5. And actually black, I think, is already in a bad state here. We see after b4 Ivanchuk just plays knight a4. Okay, the knight goes back, but there's still a problem with d5. There's actually a loose rook, and in this position Ivanchuk, even though maybe his opponent thought he'd castle queenside routinely, I've given you a slight clue though. Can you see what white can play in this position? If you were playing white, if I gave you 20 seconds, what little combination do you think is available here? So can anyone see a good move instead of just castling queenside? What would you play in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. Any ideas? Any ideas of what to play? Oh, sorry. Try and avoid looking at the score sheet of the game. If you move away from the notation tab. Okay, I thought it was a neat little combination. Yeah, just to win a pawn. C takes d5, and now queen c6. Yeah, so well done, Reese. So it's hitting, you know, the rook and the pawn. So winning a centre pawn. This is quite a big deal to win a centre pawn here. I don't think black's made this into a gambit. White's just won this centre pawn. And now to make things worse, after queen f5, this bishop's just asking for dark square weaknesses. Black actually feeds the bishop potentially on the diagonal. It might not be the greatest ever game of Alexandr Fier. I think the round before he had just drawn though with Michael Adams in a very dramatic game. I think just in round 3. But maybe, I don't know, maybe he was out on the town or something too much the night before. I don't know. This just seems like a weird game for black to play so far. He's been a bit sloppy. He's lost the centre pawn, and now he's just compromised his king's safety. So queen g4, queen e7. I mean, it could be he's just terrified of Vassily Ivanchuk, though. h4. I mean, this is pretty direct stuff. That white now is just aiming to open the h file. And okay, we know that this is not always a guaranteed win, like the recent Nakamura against Coulson game, but it's a pretty good way of trying to make black in theory on the h-file and win the game quite quickly. So black tries h5, which probably makes things a little bit worse as well. G takes. It looks as though it's closed up a line, but has it? Okay, you might argue h5, there's g5 to keep the lines closed. But we see now rook c1. And the thing is, actually c5 is quite good here for this knight now. That's better than castling, just to put pressure on c5, because we really want to wrench open this diagonal. Black now plays what seems to be a really risky move. King takes h6. So we see knight c5, an incredibly dangerous move, looking at the knight here. Black is now with the king on h6, potentially losing a piece. If he plays something like takes here, this just loses a piece to queen g5 check, because we're just going to take this bishop after and potentially make the black king soon after. So that's not possible. So black plays knight df6, hitting the queen. Check, king h7, and now line opening h5. It's just, I don't know, such a crushing position that kind of impressed me. And even though I had gone through the game, I wondered, like a few hours later, how on earth did this happen again? It just seems a total disaster for black, this position. You know, it's not just the losing of the centre pawn, it's actually this bishop potentially on this diagonal now as well. Knight takes h5 was played, and actually nothing too clever was played here in terms of rook h5. In fact, believe it or not, Vassily Ivanchuk just saw another opportunity just to take the queens off and fork the rooks. No need even to immediately go for the king. He can just do this, and here black actually resigns. Actually, the king side attack is still carrying on anyway after winning the exchange with bishop h5. So black had enough. I thought this was just showing, you know, very powerful play by Vassily Ivanchuk. You know, so it was supposedly a solid opening choice for black. You know, the classic Slav triangle, but it just seems to turn. It seemed to just turn into a disaster soon after, as though it became a reverse French, because black had done this thing. He'd weakened d5. White had gone for this plan. d5 collapsed. All this backfired because c6. It was a strange sort of disaster, I thought, anyway. So let's have a look at another game. So I thought that was quite interesting. Now, this is another interesting disaster game. So Gata Kamsky is in the tournament as well. It's a very, very strong tournament. Loads of grandmasters are there. So he was playing now with black against an international master. And this is actually in round 8. I think this could be actually today's game. And this has got a personal interest for me, because I've been totally destroyed in this line. Gata Kamsky after d4, he's quite exotic with the black pieces when playing against d4. He played actually the Dutch defence, and I think that means if he carries on doing this, I'm gonna check out. And I love commenting on these Dutch defence games. I think they're very, very interesting. So now white tries this trendy anti-Dutch system, bishop g5. And I know from bitter experience that if you do play knight f6, you could get quite quickly destroyed. White could just double your pawns, and then it sort of punches the d5 square. And then I've had a horrible game against an international master once, Lauren de Costa. I didn't last very long with knight f6. So carefully sidestepping that, g6. So knight c3, bishop g7. White still plays in a sort of violent manner against this, as though he really knows what he's doing in this anti-Dutch system. He plays e4, f takes, knight takes e4. But in a way, white's centre control has been potentially compromised, because black does have more central pawns than white here. And if black can later get in d5 and then push for e5, you'll see that white's central control could in theory come under scrutiny. d5 is played, knight c3, and now a very nice move. And if you're going to play the Dutch and you're going to experience this horrible system, I think this is good to know. Knight h6, just to reroute the knight, protects against the swapping off. So that's a neat maneuver, knight h6 to f7 here, and the bishop goes back. And now we start to see this scrutiny on white's centre with knight c6, as though e5 later is on the cards. For the moment, queen d2, bishop f5, bishop e2, and black doesn't even want to castle kingside. He plays queen d7 with the interesting possibility of castling queenside now. Both sides actually castle queenside. King b1, king b8. And I think black has a very nice position here, from this opening. Very nice position indeed, even though white has played this anti-Dutch system. We see this curious move a3. Okay, not so curious. It looks as though the idea is to stop all this business with c2. I guess if the knight was pinned, we might have a6 potentially as a useful move. So anyway, a3, h6, h3, g5 gives the bishop, room to go back, and actually it goes to e6 though. Rook he1, rook hf8, and it looks as though black has a very comfortable position. And in particular now, this knight can maneuver somewhere to d6. For example, knight h2, knight d6. f3 is played, trying to deprive the knight of e4. The bishop now goes to g8, and that unveils actually quite an aesthetic, the beautiful couple of bishops here. But also e5 is on the cards now to try and put white's d4 pawn under great scrutiny. So knight b5, a6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6. The knight is under fire here, giving black time now to play this e5 move. So knight f1, finally e5, and I think black's doing fantastically now. And there's a kind of gaze of these bishops down white's king side actually, and I think that's quite attractive. So d takes e5, queen takes e5, threatening now mate in 1, c3, but now black kind of liberates loads of pieces with d4 as a temporary pawn sack, and you'll see this beautiful bishop on this diagonal. Whoa, pardon me, on this diagonal, c takes d, black just plays not knight takes d4 but queen d5, threatening now queen a2. And actually this is a very, very difficult position for white. White actually resigned here. I did a quick engine check on the position. Why did white resign? Well, in this position, it looks as though, okay, b4 technically does prevent, you know, queen a2. But I think it's still quite difficult here. There are a number of ideas. I think just even this idea, rook here, leaves white in difficulties, because even e3 is like looser to this stuff. And we've also got, you know, this check as well, which is useful. Basically, technically, this position is too loose for white's king. So after this pawn sack, you know, black is much better, and white just gave in here. Actually, yeah. So I just thought that was a neat game. So the pawn sack, and white's convinced it is like collapsing soon, and just resigned. So anti-Dutch system beaten quite badly there for that win. So let's have a look at another game. Okay, now I found this one of Vassily Ivanchuk quite intriguing as well. So he was playing white here. This is round 6. So Ivanchuk playing white plays e4, and we get a Sicilian defense with standard looking sort of Sicilian. White castles kingside e6, bishop drops back. I'll get you to an interesting moment, which I thought was quite interesting though. So we have this standard stuff to try and, you know, extend the scope of the bishop here with this f5, knight g4, f takes, bishop f4. So queen c7 defending d6. This queen on d4 sits prettily eyeing actually a7, and that becomes significant pretty soon now. In this position now we see rook takes f8, and the thing is, well, I think if bishop takes f8 here, I think this runs into bishop takes e5, because we might be winning this d7 bishop. I think it runs into that. So black actually was forced to play rook takes f8, and I think this doesn't work, winning the bishop, because of this back row issue. If takes, we've got this back row issue to exploit. So that's why I think the rook had to take, because now we're kind of mating white. So given that is the case, I think this is the reason why in this position rook takes f8 was played. Okay, it does prevent bishop takes e5, but there's a weakness of the last move. It's just neglected a7. And I don't know, this goes into an immensely technical phase here. White does take on a7, and black plays d5 now. Well, threatening, it seems bishop c5 check is pretty serious stuff. King h1. Now bishop d6. And we see e takes d5. Black has another idea here. Knight g4. Black is going for white's king, gunning for white's king. Ivanchuk's very, very calm here. He plays queen d4. Okay, it looks at the knight. So e5. And now queen d3. And here it looks as though black's calculated this combination to try and win material by force. He plays actually e4. And this looks very, very dangerous for white. You know, queen e4, bishop g3. It looks pretty bad. Pretty all over actually for white's king, if that was the case. So knight takes e4, bishop takes g3, queen takes g3, and now, you know, it looks as though we're in black's conceptual combination, because queen f4 here is such a pain actually. Black is threatening this back row mate. Black is threatening to win the knight, and it would seem that, you know, this knight is just ready to fork king and rook here if the knight left. But what does white do apart from queen takes f4 here? White has to play queen takes f4, I think. Rook takes f4. So if the knight now moves, knight f2. So it looks as though black has, you know, gambited these pawns to get this position to win material. We see h3, knight e3, and it still looks dangerous for white because, you know, what does white want to do in this position? Doesn't he plays actually rook d4, going into purposely. So he's protecting this knight, but he's going into knight f5, and it looks as though rook takes e4 and knight g3 is now on the cards to win material by force. But had Ivanchuk seen the whole sting at the end of the towel here for black's conception, he's already a few pawns up. He's not really that bothered by this, losing a piece. He plays rook b4. I find that quite amusing. He's going to collect so many pawns now from black. After rook takes e4, you know, he's getting this pawn as well. He doesn't need to take here and allow this. He just takes on b7. How many pawns has he got? It's loads. But nevertheless, black still has some dangers to pose. Black plays h5 as though, you know, this one, check, and then mating is on the cards. But now white's king safety is increased with g4, keeping some squares available for the king. hg, hg, bishop c8, rook c7, check, king h2, check, king g1, knight d6. There's so many pawns for the piece here. So rook c6, and actually this is winning material again. So Ivanchuk's on top. He didn't mind even losing a piece. And I just find the game kind of remarkable. And now it's kind of, you know, if takes, there's bishop d3 check. What I find remarkable about this game is, would you necessarily expect from a Sicilian defence like that Ivanchuk to be going after the a7 pawn and seemingly taking huge risks? But it seems to have paid off. So he's just trivially kind of winning now. Bishop h3, b4, king f7. He just plays b5 here. He's got so many pawns, he doesn't even care in this position about rook takes d3. Check, king f2. Rook d3, you know, white could just take off the last pawn. And I think these pawns are just simply winning. The king's going to just come over here. So black actually didn't even bother with that, I think. Black just resigned in this position. It's like too many pawns down. I thought that was an interesting game anyway. So, yeah. That was a very strong opponent with black. 2680 as well that Ivanchuk beat there. Now this is an interesting King's Engine defense, this next game from round 8. So my interest in this is playing the King's Engine as black. I thought it was interesting, and against the dreaded bayonet attack. So Fier, Alexandr Fier is playing Al Sayed, so two grandmasters playing against each other, and this bayonet attack system is this very quick b4 in this position, the bayonet attack. We see that now. How does black handle this? So this is of interest if you play the King's Engine. Knight h5, rook e1, f5. So not minding at all this knight g5 business. Knight f6, f3, king moves, bishop e3. Actually, the first interesting looking move now, bishop h6, taking the opportunity to pin the knight. And it looks strange that white is playing h4 now. This does look odd already to me. Knight h5, c5. White is getting on with a queenside attack. But after f4, bishop f2, black just takes on g5, hg. Now knight g8, as though queen takes g5 is on. But you see, the problem with this, I think that was perceived, is it's losing a little bit of time. You know, white's queenside attack is kind of rampant here. Does black really want to do that? So at the moment it's white's move c takes, and queen d2, as though this is a clever pawn sack. But also factor in that white might consider, if queen takes g5, there's actually a pin here to exploit. So maybe something like g4 potentially. I haven't really checked this, but we've got that pin to consider as well. So whatever the reason was, black actually played h6. So this is interesting because it's trying to like open this h file quite quickly. Rook ec1, hg, king f1. The king is trying to make a run for it here, but the rook is ready now to swing round and use this h file. Rook f7, rook c2, rook at h7, and it's quite quick really. Knight g3 and rook h1 are on the cards. The king is still making a run for it. Knight g3. This is taken, so we've got trebled pawns now, quite spectacularly. Bishop f1, bishop d7, knight e2, and now g4, trying to break down this pawn structure. f4, I think this was by the engines a questionable move anyway. This particular f4, I think black's already doing well here. We see queen f6, and it's eyeing now this rook as well. Rook c3, and now bishop b5, putting more pressure, you know, on f4 if this is going to be taken. Knight takes g3, black takes on f1, f takes, d takes, knight takes, rook f8. White looks to be having a bad situation here. If you look at the rooks and this rook, it looks as though it's a disaster for Alexandr Fier. I don't know, maybe he's, you know, been having a good holiday in this tournament. I don't know. He just gets these positions which I think are amazingly disastrous. I don't know why. So king e2, I mean, his king's trying to make a run for it. Check, king d3, check, king c2, and then we see rook f2. Yes, that does skewer the queen against the king. Pretty bad. Yes, bad news. So I think this is the end of the game really. After rook h1, actually white resigned. So this shows even if you become a 2-5-7-2 grandmaster, you too could play like white here at the peak of your powers. If you get this near 2600 rating, I don't know. Now it's nice. The King's Engine Defense is a very aggressive opening, and it's nice to see these, you know, openings, not just Slavs, being played with success. Maybe they become surprise weapons or something. People are just expecting the Slav defense or the Grunfeld. So the King's Engine is a nice surprise weapon, maybe you could argue. So anyway, let's have a look at another game. Now, the winner of this, actually following on nicely, this was Al-Sayed with the black pieces, but Michael Adams in an earlier round 2, was playing Al-Sayed, and I found a particular position of somehow great fascination, probably more fascinating than you might imagine. So let's have a look. Adams as white, so Sicilian defense, and again we get this kind of position a bit like the Ivanchuk game, where you don't get a kind of normal sort of kingside attack. Well, it looks as though the game was going to be a really violent game after g4, but Al-Sayed with black kind of made sure this wasn't too much of a danger. He played this g5 move here, sort of positional pawn sacrifice to get this e5 square. Adams actually he didn't take, he played f5. He gives black the e5 square, and it looked as though he didn't get much from the opening here. It didn't seem that much after knight f3, knight fd7. It looks as though black's got this strong point, but let's skip past this for a moment. King B1, bishop G7, rook HF1, knight F7, bishop D4. We get this strong queen in the centre, a bit like the Ivanchuk game after queen D4 check. And maybe, just like the Ivanchuk game, you know, why is it the A6 pawn is picked on pretty soon? You see this plan here to pick on the A6 pawn. White takes on F8. Queen takes F8. And okay, black's king is pretty safe actually with that knight and this position Yefal. But white is going to torture the pawn structure. He plays actually the move A4. And the queen does a good job actually preventing B4. So the pawn is actually restrained at the moment and under fire from everything. It takes on A4, so exposing a little bit this A6 pawn. King G8. You might not think this is a disaster just yet, but after knight B6, now knight C4 is on the cards, which would get rid of black's best piece. Queen G7, knight C4 challenging one of black's best pieces in the position. The knight goes to F7. Queen E3, which looks another kind of strange move to play, but it does prepare this pin exploitation with E5 pretty soon. Bishop C6, and then we see E5. Black plays D5, and we've got that pin, and now the A6 pawn is really gone for with Queen B6. And it's actually, it seems to be winning a pawn now. Maybe bishop C6 that black had played was a mistake of some sort. So black's actually losing the A pawn. And what I find really amazing here is how quickly black loses the entire game after losing this A pawn. Some sort of miracle. I don't know. Rook C7. We see Queen B6. And it's tempting, I guess, to try and protect the rook with this knight takes E5 rather than move the rook back. I think maybe, possibly moving the rook back should have been considered. But knight takes E5 just seems to immediately lose, because white now played Queen B8 check. So if Queen F8, we just take the rook. King H7. White now takes on E5, setting up a really nasty pin. Queen takes E5, and Adams just plays a really crushing move in this position. He just plays Rook F1, so he's actually threatening Rook F7 because of that pin, as well as Bishop D3, and it's pretty terminal stuff. If black actually resigned in this position after Rook F1. If Queen G7, I think we just play Bishop D3. So I just thought that was amazing that you wouldn't have thought that from this position, with white playing the move A4 earlier, I mean, I wouldn't have thought this was going to happen. It seemed quite a comfortable position for black, but A4 created this quite quick collapse of black's position. I thought that was quite notable. I don't know about you guys, if you thought that was notable. I thought it was very, very interesting. So anyway, let's have a look at another game. Wheelie against Louis Gallego. I think this is quite innovative, what white played in this game. So Wei Yi 2607 against Louis Gallego. So this was in round 5. It was a Sicilian defense with a bit of a difference after E6 D4. So the can variation, Sicilian can. Bishop D3 is the top move, I think, in this position. Queen C7, white castled. Knight F6, Queen E2, D6, F4, Knight C6. White just took on C6. After B takes, Knight D2. Nothing unusual so far. But here it is. After E5, we see an interesting idea. B3. So I think this is quite interesting, putting pressure on e5, bishop e7, bishop b2. So black didn't really want to take this f pawn, this f file pressure. Bishop e6, and white now put the king into safety. You know, these checks can be annoying. a5, white now takes on e5, and now bishop c4. It would be very pleasant to get a knight on c4, because then we got more pressure on e5. And black doesn't really want to move the bishop back or accept double pawns. So he did actually develop white's knight with bishop takes c4 and try and defend now e5 with knight d7. But alas, here white has queen h5. So we've still got huge pressure now on e5. What does black do here? It's actually a really tricky position. I mean, bishop f6, I think we just got bishop a3, actually cutting the king and threatening horrible things. So black decided to just lose the pawn with castles. Not good. Knight takes, bishop takes. And the game was very, very quickly decided here after queen c8. Can you see what white played in this position? Final move of the game at move 20. So I give you 20 seconds here. What would you play as white? So starting from now, white's play. Any ideas? Any ideas? Okay, I'm going to show you. Well, I hope you got this. Just bishop takes g7 actually. It's actually because there's a loose piece around. Actually, so if, you know, king takes, well, black resigned actually. If king takes, there's queen e5 check. It's as simple as that. It wins another pawn, black had enough. Can't lose pawn after pawn, and king safety is compromised here. Okay, the can has gone wrong there, Sicilian can. Now I thought this is quite an interesting game. One of Canada's top players now, Eric Hansen, he's doing fantastically well, and he played an interesting game with black among many others. So his opponent Nikolai Mikkelsen 2-4-2-3. So Eric Hansen's 2-5-5-9 at the moment, and we see B3 being played by Nikolai. Very surprising B3 here, like the game we just seen. Now black constructs a structure to sort of dampen down the bishop. Bishop c4, knight f6, knight c3, but it looks as though d5 might be a concern for black. Knight c6, knight ge2, a6, a4, g6. Okay, so we have a position which looks okay, but I think now after h3, black's play to me looks very neat and aggressive, dynamic. Knight h5, knight d5, rook b8 as though b5 is being prepared, knight e3, b5, that's taken, bishop d5, knight d4. So this bishop is really blunted at the moment. King h2. Now knight f4. It's a very nice knight to have on f4 when the opponents play h3. Very aggressive. Knight g1. So white's definitely on the defensive here. I don't think his opening can be considered a success. Now we want to move this f pawn, but it's pinned, so took this off. Knight takes, and now the f pawn's ready to roll with the bishop pair. Is nice. g3. And now to get the rooks working quite quickly on the f file, rook b7. So the rook's going to double. Rook a8. Okay, a nasty pin though for a moment. Knight e6 to try and evict the rook. That c7 square is useful. Bishop c1. Rook bf7 for the moment. As though, you know, f takes and rook f2 is now threatened. White plays e takes. And I think there's a little cheapo here actually to note that if rook takes f5, I think the cheapo's rook takes here. So there's knight e7 check, but that's got to be a bit careful here. So actually a clever temporary pawn sack instead, knight c7, challenge both of these pieces. But also with this e takes, this diagonal is a little bit weaker on white's king, this diagonal. So knight takes c7, queen takes. This pawn's kind of pinned to f2. Queen f3. Rook takes f5. Check. King h8. Bishop. Now look at this bishop here. It looks dangerous. And white kind of invites it. White plays bishop e3. And okay, it supports f2. That was a threat. But after bishop b7, where is the queen? Where's the queen going? White takes on f8. The rook is also attacked. Bishop takes f8. Queen e6. And it looks as though the queen's threatening queen e8. Okay, it looks as though the queen's got squares. But black rules out the e8 square. Now, black actually plays queen c6 with tempo, threatening mate. White has to do something about that. f3, but now, can you see the final move of the game? Black to play. If I give you 20 seconds, final move of the game should be apparent. I think I've given a clue about this. So black to play and win. Final move. Move 28. What does black play? Well, I hope you see it. I hope you see it. It's bishop c8. Just the queen's actually got no squares. It's got absolutely no squares. It's been run out of squares, remarkably. So it wasn't about the f-file. That was a bit of a... The queen got sucked in somehow. I remember a Kasparov game a bit like that, where the queen was sucked in. So sometimes it seemed to be about king safety, but then the queen was lost. Okay. Richard report. I don't know if we should have one or two more games. I think I don't know, it's a bit much. Maybe what we've gone over. Yeah. Does anyone want one or two more games? Okay. Let's have a look at this. Richard report continues to be innovative in this tournament. He's making a name for himself in his in previous tournaments, high-level tournaments. So he was playing against David Lorino Nieto 2465 with the black pieces. And he's got this unusual French defense variation. It reminds me of my pet Byrne variation. It is a bit like the Byrne variation with immediate knight f6 now. And he goes for the double pawns. But he plays with knight c6 for a quick e5. This is the idea. A quick e5. So bishop f4 e5. After takes queen e7. He wants to like try and castle queenside sometimes quickly. Bishop b5, f takes, bishop drops back. Bishop d7. It looks like a really neat idea, this system. Queen h5. Black just castles. It's a very aggressive play with the black pieces. A fun opening position to have with black. And so white puts more pressure on the e5 pawn with knight f3. I think it's too dangerous to try and win that pawn, of course. f6. White castles. Rook g8. I mean, this is the thing I like about the Burn variation, but it looks pretty solid at the moment, this g file. Rook fe1. Queen c5, hitting the bishop. Bishop drops back. Knight e7, threatening nasty things now. Where's this knight heading? Let's see. Queen f7. Queen b6 for the moment, protecting f6. Rook ad1. Rook g7, kicking the queen out. Bishop e6, kicking the queen again. Rook g4, kicking the queen again. What Kasparov would call hard pressing, I think, when you do threat after threat after threat. Hard pressing. Queen c2, h5. Now this g file is subject of interest. Knight h4 is played. Rook g7. King h1. And in the midst of all this, actually, does black really want to take the a pawn? Isn't this a bit crazy? Wasn't it meant to be structurally about this g file? Why take this a pawn? Why are we seeing this in a lot of these games? The very strong players seem to be interested in taking the opponent's a pawn. And here, bishop takes a2. You know, is it not opening up some lines against his king? I think it causes a slight panic as well, though. It puts a bit of pressure on white to justify this. b4. Bishop goes to e6. f3. Knight d5. Bishop goes to f2. Looks as though is black in trouble or something. Queen c6. Looks to be on c3 here. And white actually gives up c3, so he's trying to open up the lines. Queen a2. Is there a problem? But what about this? Queen a3 shutting out the queen. Once the queen exchange, now he's 2 pawns up. Queen c4. And actually now this g rook switches to the centre with rook gd7. And, you know, is white going to get any time to exploit the a7 pawn? He plays rook a1. Unfortunately, it's black's turn, and black can be resourceful here. And it's a total disaster now. So, from taking this a pawn, like we've seen in some previous examples, how does this turn into a total disaster? You know, I think the problem is that opponents are trying to regain their material, and in regaining their material, or trying to, they become extremely tactically vulnerable sometimes. We saw in the Michael Adams game, when Michael Adams won the a pawn, that when the opponent was trying to do something, you know, clever, you know, he went into a massive pin. Now here, what are we going into after Queen e4? We're going into this horrible attack on the queen here, and the bishop seems to be attacked. Queen e4, and for a moment this looks ingenious, doesn't it? Giving up the bishop to try and mate the black king. You know, if queen takes d3, rook takes a7, threatens now mate. What does black do about this? It's also threatening queen b7. The problem is, there's a slight snag here. There's a slight snag after queen e4. Can you see what black played in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. Okay, I'm going to show you. I hope you got this. Oh, that wasn't really 20 seconds, but anyway. Black to play. He doesn't move his queen. Doesn't take. He just takes the knight. He takes the bishop with his knight. Because look at this. We've got knight f2 check here. It's a disaster. White had to resign. You know, we're just gonna take this queen with check. Doesn't matter about this anymore. We just don't do anything. We can just you know, rook d1 will do. Anything will do. Well, nearly anything will do. Actually, just king b8. Okay, this position. Try to take it seriously. I think b6. I think b6 is good enough. Or bishop c5 check. In fact, bishop c5, even better. No problem. So anyway, the point was, actually, I really wanted to say was this knight takes d3 was the end of the game. So it just seems strange that black, he starts off with nabbing this a pawn which was offered. I don't know, maybe it was some sort of positional sacrifice at some point, this a pawn, but he was kicking the queen. He was kind of winning that a pawn, actually, to be fair. And then it looks as though there was this insertion of h5 though, sort of taking it here, I guess to protect his own pawn. In retrospect, it wasn't about the g file, but now the a pawn is actually on, isn't it? Here again, it looks as though rook g7 wasn't with interest of the a pawn. I lost interest, but finally now it was taken, and then we have that disaster soon after, which is strange. Okay, so I don't know, I've got this game which I'm not entirely sure I should show, but let's have a look. Elizabeth Pat's 2-4-5-8 against Victor Bologan, a 26-60, so slightly outrated. A French defence. Elizabeth Pat's playing white, and we see this classical system. Knight e2, I think it's Steinitz or something. Knight e2, a3, f6, b4, c takes knight, e takes d4, knight takes, queen takes d4, and black seems to have a nice position for trying to undermine white's pawn structures here on both sides of the board, not just in the center, but this structure here is a bit vulnerable. a5, bishop e3. Now we see a takes, c takes, and now I think this is like a key move if you're playing the French defense. You want to sort of hit both structures at the same time. Knight b8, nice reroute to here to hit both structures. And there's also, of course, a pin potentially with bishop takes b4 check on here, but the queen at the moment is protecting a1. But with knight c6, that's going to be an issue. That b4 pawn, queen b2, knight c6, bishop b5, and this, I think this is classic French defense play now. Black takes on e5, f takes, plays d4, and there's some problems here. Bishop f2. Black does a classic move in the French defense to blow up white's center. Rook takes f3, and after g takes, knight takes e5, so it's going to win potentially this f3 pawn as well. White's castle's queenside, but now queen d5 hits the bishop as well as the pawn, of course. Bishop takes d4, knight takes f3, so the bishop's still being attacked here. It's a bit of a strange situation for the king to be over here. It looks exposed. White plays a4, queen e4, as though bishop g5 check now, because the queen's covering this diagonal. Bishop g5 check is pretty nasty threat. That stops offering the exchange. e5, queen b3 check, king moves to h8, queen f7, at least threatening mate. This is shielded though with bishop g4, so cutting off the rook. And I think white's in big trouble. Rook takes g4, queen takes e7, knight takes d4. So after all this, white's king is just, you know, there's just no protection around the king basically after all this. And also black's a pawn up. Rook f1, okay, threatening mate again. But queen c8 check is the last move of the game. The king is just too weak, getting mated. You know, if d1 we just mate with queen heron and e2. If b1 we just mate with queen c2 and then knight b3. So yeah, I think that was an interesting French defense game. Probably, you know, shortly mated after king d2 with queen c2. Something horrible is going to happen there. Queen e2 after. But yeah, for this game, I think the interest point. Let's see, the interest point. Why did I raise this game as an interesting game? Was white a bit too reckless somehow? It just shows the French defense has got bite to it. If you play moves like this and then play an exchange sack, you know, the French defense is still aggressive. It's not so passive. I wonder why bishop takes c6 wasn't played here. Maybe there's a reason for that. So d4, yeah, black got very active after rook takes f3 anyway. Okay, Shaparov against Mickelson. Was that interesting? Not sure it was. Let's have a quick look. Ivan Shaparov against Nikolai Mickelson in round 2. So it was a Sicilian defense. So a 2-6-7-2 playing white against a 2-4-2-3. Bishop e3, e5. Bishop e2, bishop e6. Okay, so knight d5 was played here. So white is now threatening bishop b6. Dangerous. That's taken. He takes. Bishop drops back. Queen d2. It looks as though, in theory, you know, one of the black problems has been solved. The d5 square. But now actually white plays not just for the c5 break, but actually on the king side with f4. I guess this also threatens, of course, these two connected passed pawns could still be overwhelming on f takes e5. So knight g4, and this is actually just taken off, and now f takes e5. And yes, these two pawns simply look overwhelming after c5. Should black really have allowed this? Queen e8. I think things are grim here already after knight a5. Black actually ignores b7. I don't. Maybe it's not on or something. f5 actually threatens. I don't know actually what it threatens. d6 is played. Bishop drops back. Check. Queen f7. The queens are taken off. And now actually knight c4. The knight's got better things than that. Wants to get e5. That would be very nice. Bishop f6. Rook a e1. Yeah, these two pawns look really strong, and e5 is a bit weak here. g6, because white actually does seem to be threatening also h3 and to take on f5. So g6, h3, bishop h5. Knight b6 hitting the rook. The rook moves, but now the rook unfortunately moves there. Maybe this was a slight mistake. Can you see what white played? Actually, well, it looks as though this pin's pretty good for white. Bishop d4. The thing is also d7 is on the cards. So bishop h4, this is just ignored with d7. Rook e6. Bishop takes e5. The bishop has to guard d8. Bishop d8. And now bishop c7 exposes an attack on the rook. And that's just really quite awkward for black to meet. I think black actually resigned here. I think actually in this position, after rook takes, white might actually play bishop takes d8 here with a bishop move and d8 to follow. That looks pretty strong actually. So the interesting point about this game, I thought, is this early f4. It seemed to be a viable strategy to try and get these two connected passed pawns. This f4. I thought it was a little bit on the unusual side, but it really worked out well here. Or maybe it's a standard plan, I don't know. But this is what Ivan Cheperonov, a 2-6-7-2, played with great effect. It seemed to steamroller the opponent in the center. So anyway, yeah, I thought this was an interesting game selection to knock up quite a few. I know I went over them quickly, but anyway, so I'm going to upload this to YouTube now. So have a good week, and yeah, see you next week at around the same time. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for coming. Any comments or questions on YouTube?